The night that changed everything. Mark Donovan stared at the pregnancy test in his trembling hands, the two pink lines blurring through his tears. His one-night stand with his boss, Victoria Winters, had just shattered his carefully constructed life. As a single father already struggling to raise his 8-year-old daughter after his wife's death, this revelation threatened everything: his job, his reputation, and the stable home he'd fought to maintain for little Emma. "Dad, I'm hungry. When's dinner?" Emma called from the living room, unaware that her father's world was imploding in their small bathroom. Mark quickly shoved the test into his pocket, his mind racing. Victoria had been scheduling exclusive late meetings with him for weeks now, meetings that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with their growing attraction. But this changed everything. How could he possibly manage another child when he could barely keep up with his current responsibilities? And what would happen when the board discovered their CEO was pregnant with an employee's child? The sound of his phone buzzing cut through his panic, Victoria's name flashing on the screen. His finger hovered over the answer button as a wave of regret washed over him. If only he could undo that night 3 months ago when comfort had turned to passion in her office after hours. If only he could take back the moment of weakness that now threatened to unravel both their lives. If you're enjoying this story so far, give it a like to let me know. Victoria Winters had built her reputation as the ice queen of Pinnacle Industries, brilliant, beautiful, and utterly untouchable. At 35, she had sacrificed personal relationships for professional success, climbing to CEO through sheer determination and ruthless efficiency. No one at the company suspected that beneath her perfectly tailored suits and confident exterior lay a woman who cried herself to sleep most nights, haunted by the choices that had led her to success but profound loneliness. "We need to talk," she said when Mark finally answered, her voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "Not at the office. Somewhere private." "Victoria, I found the test in your desk when I was looking for the Henderson file," Mark whispered, glancing toward the living room to ensure Emma couldn't hear. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I'm still trying to process it myself," she replied, vulnerability seeping through her carefully constructed facade. "The board meeting is tomorrow. Harrison has been looking for any excuse to force me out, and this would hand him exactly what he needs. Everything I've worked for could disappear overnight." Harrison Wells, the company's CFO and Victoria's most vocal opponent on the board, had been undermining her authority since her promotion 6 months ago. His traditional views on leadership, and women in particular, made him a dangerous enemy, especially now. Mark ran his hand through his hair, the weight of their situation pressing down on him. "Emma needs me home in the evenings. These late meetings. I can't keep doing this. My daughter is already suffering." "I know," Victoria said softly. "That's part of what we need to discuss. What will Victoria propose? Comment below with your predictions." The following day, tension hung in the air as Mark entered Victoria's office after the board meeting. Her face was unreadable as she stood by the window, the city skyline stretching behind her like a kingdom she might soon lose. "Harrison knows something's going on," she said without preamble. "He commented on our special working relationship in front of the entire board." Mark felt his stomach drop. "What did you say?" "I told him you're leading our most important project and require my direct oversight." She turned to face him, her blue eyes meeting his. But that excuse won't hold much longer. For the first time since he'd known her, Victoria looked uncertain. The woman who could command a room of executives with a single glance now seemed almost fragile, one hand unconsciously resting on her still flat stomach. "I've been thinking about what you said," she continued. "About Emma needing you home. About the impossibility of our situation." She took a deep breath. "I'm prepared to make you an offer." Before she could continue, her office door swung open without warning. Harrison Wells stood in the doorway, his thin lips curved in a triumphant smile as he held up his phone. Well, he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. I think the board will be very interested in these photos of your special meetings after hours. Mark felt the blood drain from his face as he glimpsed the images on Harrison's phone, Victoria and him embracing in her office weeks ago, her head on his shoulder as they stood by this very window. Victoria straightened, her vulnerability instantly replaced by steel. "Harrison, you're trespassing in a private conversation. And you're jeopardizing this company with your inappropriate relationship," he countered. "I've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. I suggest you both prepare for significant changes around here." As Harrison left, the door closing behind him with finality, Mark and Victoria stood in stunned silence. Everything was falling apart faster than either of them had anticipated. "I could lose my daughter," Mark whispered, the reality of potential unemployment and scandal hitting him full force. "If her grandparents find out about this mess, they'll renew their custody petition. They've been waiting for me to fail since Sarah died." Victoria's expression shifted, something resolute and fierce replacing her momentary defeat. "No," she said firmly. "I won't let that happen. This story is getting intense. Hit subscribe if you want to see more content like this." That night, as Mark tucked Emma into bed, his heart ached with the possibility that these simple moments might be numbered. His in-laws had never approved of him, believing their daughter had married beneath her. They'd been looking for any opportunity to claim Emma since Sarah's death 3 years ago, arguing that a struggling graphic designer turned corporate marketing specialist couldn't provide the life their granddaughter deserved. "Daddy, why do you look sad?" Emma asked, her small hand reaching up to touch his cheek. Mark forced a smile. "Just tired, sweetheart." "Is it because of your pretty boss? The one in the picture on your phone?" Mark froze. "What picture?" "I saw it when I was playing your puzzle game. You were hugging her and smiling. You never smile like that anymore." The innocence of her observation struck him like a physical blow. He hadn't realized how much his daughter noticed, how perceptive she was to the changes in him since Victoria had entered their lives. "She's just someone I work with," he said carefully. Emma's eyes, so like her mother's, studied him with surprising wisdom. "You should invite her for dinner. Maybe she makes you happy." Before Mark could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Victoria, "My car is outside. We need to talk before tomorrow." Standing on his porch 20 minutes later, after arranging for his neighbor to listen for Emma, Mark was surprised to find Victoria looking completely transformed. Gone was the power suit and perfect makeup. Instead, she wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. "I've been sitting in my car for an hour trying to work up the courage to come to your door," she admitted. "I've never seen where you live." "It's not much," Mark said, suddenly self-conscious of his modest home. "It's perfect," she replied, her eyes taking in the children's drawings magnetized to the refrigerator visible through the kitchen doorway, the well-worn furniture that spoke of comfort rather than status. "It's a home." The simple observation carried weight beyond its words. Victoria had a penthouse apartment filled with expensive furniture that had been selected by an interior designer. She had never bothered to make it personal, it was just somewhere to sleep between workdays. "I've made a decision," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "I'm going to resign before Harrison can force me out." "Victoria, no. Let me finish," she interrupted. "I'm resigning as CEO, but I'm not leaving the company. I've spoken with 3 board members who still support me. I'm going to restructure my role, create a new position that allows me more flexibility and fewer hours." Mark stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "Why would you do that? You've worked your entire life to reach this position." Victoria's hand moved to her stomach again, the gesture becoming familiar. "Because some things matter more than a title. This baby, and you, and Emma. I've spent my whole life chasing success, but I've never stopped to consider what success actually means to me. If this story is touching your heart, please share it with someone who might need to hear it too. The emergency board meeting the next morning was nothing short of explosive. Harrison arrived with a triumphant smirk, digital evidence in hand, only to be completely blindsided when Victoria opened the meeting by announcing her own restructuring proposal. Effective immediately, I am stepping down as CEO to take on the newly created role of Chief Strategy Officer, which will allow me to focus on long-term vision while maintaining a more balanced personal life, she stated calmly, her eyes briefly meeting Mark's across the room. Before Harrison could capitalize on her announcement, she continued, and in the interest of full transparency, I want to inform the board that I am expecting a child and will be taking appropriate family leave when the time comes. The room erupted in murmurs. Harrison stood, waving his phone. This is exactly why women in leadership positions are problematic. She's been having an affair with a subordinate. Victoria's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Mr. Donovan and I have developed a personal relationship outside of work hours, which we have kept separate from our professional responsibilities. However, to avoid any conflict of interest, I've already arranged for him to be transferred to the creative division, reporting to Director Chen rather than directly to me. One of the older board members, a woman who had supported Victoria's rise, spoke up. Harrison, put your phone away. We're not a gossip tabloid. If Victoria has found a way to restructure her role that benefits both her and the company, while addressing any potential conflicts of interest, I see no issue here. Harrison's face reddened as he realized his carefully orchestrated coup was falling apart. This is unacceptable. The shareholders care about results, another board member interrupted. And Victoria has delivered those consistently. Her personal life is her own business as long as company policies are followed. As the meeting continued, with the board ultimately approving Victoria's proposal and appointing the COO as interim CEO, Mark felt a strange mixture of relief and uncertainty. They had weathered the immediate storm, but what did this mean for them? For the baby? For Emma? When Victoria found him in the break room afterward, the question must have been written on his face. I meant what I said, she told him quietly. Some things matter more than titles. I've spent my entire adult life afraid to want anything beyond professional success because wanting more felt like weakness. But now? Mark prompted when she hesitated. Now I'm terrified, but I'm also more alive than I've ever been, she admitted. I don't know how to be a mother. I don't know how to be part of a family. But I want to learn. The final chapters of this story will touch your heart. Like and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. 6 months later, Mark stood in his kitchen watching as Victoria and Emma decorated cookies together, flour dusting both their faces. Victoria's pregnancy was now obvious, her corporate wardrobe replaced by comfortable maternity clothes when she wasn't at work. The transition hadn't been seamless, there had been arguments, adjustments, and moments of panic on both sides. Victoria had to learn that not everything could be managed with the same efficiency as a corporate takeover, while Mark had to overcome his fear of letting someone new into the fragile ecosystem he'd built with Emma. Dad, Victoria says the baby kicked. Come feel. Emma called excitedly, waving him over. As Mark placed his hand on Victoria's rounded belly, feeling the flutter of movement beneath his palm, he was struck by how completely his life had transformed in less than a year. The night that he had once wished he could undo had set in motion a chain of events that had brought unexpected joy into their lives. Harrison had eventually left the company, unable to accept the new dynamic. Victoria's restructured role actually suited her talents better, allowing her to focus on innovation rather than day-to-day operations. And most surprisingly, she had discovered a natural affinity with Emma, who adored her bonus mom with unrestrained enthusiasm. What are you thinking about? Victoria asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. About how sometimes our biggest mistakes turn out to be our greatest blessings, he replied, brushing flour from her cheek. I spent so long just surviving after Sarah died, trying to be everything Emma needed. I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness again." Victoria's eyes softened. "I spent my whole life thinking I had to choose between success and family. It never occurred to me that redefining success was an option." Later that evening, after Emma had gone to bed, they sat together on the porch swing that Victoria had insisted on installing, claiming every proper family home needed one. The night was cool, the neighborhood quiet except for distant laughter and the occasional passing car. "I got a call from my mother today," Victoria said, breaking their comfortable silence. "She wants to visit when the baby comes." Mark raised an eyebrow. "The mother you haven't spoken to in 5 years? The one who told you that choosing career over family made you unnatural?" Victoria nodded. "That's the one. I think I understand her better now. Not that she was right," she added quickly. "But I understand that she was afraid for me. Afraid I'd end up alone." "And what did you tell her?" "I told her I'd found my own way to have both a career and a family. That it doesn't have to be either/or." She leaned against him. "And I told her she has a granddaughter already who's eager to meet her." Mark wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Emma will charm her instantly. She has that effect on people." "Like father, like daughter," Victoria murmured, tilting her face up to his. As they kissed under the porch light, Mark reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a night of comfort that turned to passion, through scandal and near disaster, to this moment of quiet contentment. Life rarely followed a straight path, and sometimes the detours led to destinations far better than originally planned. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe. Share with someone who needs to be reminded that mistakes can sometimes lead to our greatest blessings. The baby arrived 2 weeks early, a healthy boy they named James after Victoria's grandfather. As Mark watched Victoria holding their son, with Emma perched beside them on the hospital bed, he felt a completeness he hadn't thought possible again. "We're a real family now," Emma declared, gently touching her baby brother's tiny fingers. Victoria looked up at Mark, her eyes filled with tears and wonder. "Yes," she agreed softly. "We are." 2 years later, on a crisp autumn morning, Mark stood nervously at the altar of a small chapel filled with flowers and familiar faces. Emma, now 10 and impossibly grown up in her lavender junior bridesmaid dress, held baby James's hand as he toddled beside her, a tiny ring bearer with his father's eyes and his mother's determined expression. The music changed, and the guests rose as Victoria appeared at the entrance. She was breathtaking in a simple ivory gown that flowed around her like liquid moonlight, her blonde hair adorned with tiny white flowers. But it was her radiant smile that captivated Mark. So different from the guarded, professional mask she had worn when they first met. As she walked toward him, Mark caught sight of Victoria's mother in the front row, dabbing at her eyes while bouncing Victoria's 6-month-old niece on her knee. The reconciliation had been tentative at first, but time and shared joy had healed old wounds. Beside her sat Mark's former in-laws, who had finally made peace with him after seeing the loving family he and Victoria had created for Emma. Harrison Wells was conspicuously absent, having left the country for a position overseas after his failed coup attempt. His departure had ultimately strengthened the company, allowing for more progressive policies that supported working parents and flexible schedules, changes Victoria had championed in her new role. When Victoria reached him, Mark took her hands in his, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them to this moment. "I once wished I could undo the night that brought us together," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Now I'm grateful for every moment, even the difficult ones." Victoria squeezed his hands, her eyes shining. "We built something beautiful from chaos," she replied. "Something neither of us could have imagined alone." As they exchanged their vows before friends, family, and colleagues who had witnessed their unconventional love story unfold, Mark realized that sometimes life's greatest gifts arrive disguised as mistakes. The night he had once regretted had become the foundation of a happiness deeper and more authentic than anything he could have planned. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Emma cheered loudest of all, rushing forward to embrace them both as James clapped his tiny hands in delight. They were no longer just two people who had found each other through circumstance. They were a family forged through challenge, choice, and unwavering love. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. Remember that sometimes our greatest challenges lead to our most beautiful beginnings. In the end, it wasn't about undoing the past or perfect planning for the future. It was about finding the courage to embrace the unexpected turns life presented, and recognizing that sometimes what seems like a mistake